Well, hi everyone, welcome. I am Michael Morella, managing editor of events at US News and World Report. We're here today to do a deep dive into how best to navigate the new internship landscape. Now, whether you're an employer looking to revamp your internship program or a student trying to break into a career field through a hands-on learning experience, we hope that this session will give you some real timely and actionable intel. We'll also spend some time unpacking data and insights from a recent US News survey of more than 1,700 interns and aspiring interns, which revealed some fascinating trends around remote work, networking, skill building, and the kinds of things that this cohort of individuals most value in their work experiences. For those of you who are with us live, we do want to make this session as interactive as possible. We'll be keeping an eye on the questions that you submit, and I'll try to give voice to those and others we've received prior to the event before we wrap up. And I do encourage you to check out the wealth of information and resources around careers and internships on our website at careers.usnews.com. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague and our resident careers champion, Carly Chase, Vice President and General Manager of Careers at US News. Over to you, Carly.
Thanks, Michael. Well, welcome and thank you so much to everybody who's joining us live or in the future recorded. My name is Carly Chase, as Michael said, and I'm thrilled to be able to present some of our newest proprietary research here at US News from my team, the careers team, where we really seek to build products, write content, and just overall help job seekers explore and make the important decisions about their careers in this ever changing and very fast-paced changing world of work. And so just before we dive in and get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes that I wanted to mention. First, Michael did mention that he's going to help man the chat and any questions. I really do encourage you. We'll definitely have time at the end for Q&A, but if you have anything pressing that comes up as I'm going through the presentation and these slides, I really would love to be interrupted. I don't mind that at all and encourage it. And second is I'm here, both Michael and I are live today from New York City, and the weather has been quite cold, and so I think I'm fighting a little bit of a dry throat, so just bear with me if there's any sort of interruption in my voice. But I'm well hydrated. I've got some some beverages, so we should be in good shape. And so just to get started, we're going to talk about obviously sort of the entire idea of this is to help parents, families, employers, students themselves, university administrators. I hope you're all on the line and joining us from your different perspectives about supporting students and those folks who are navigating early career decisions. And the way that I want to do this is sort of in a three-part series, three parts of the presentation. One, I'll sort of give you context for the way that I really see the problem of job seeking overall, but definitely specifically for internships in particular and for early career folks. The second, we'll actually dive into the research that Michael referred to. And then third, I want to leave you with some real actions that students can take and that you can advise, as soon as you get off the Zoom. And so just to kick it off with a little bit more context on myself, because I think it's important that you understand sort of where all this is coming from. I'm incredibly passionate about supporting professionals, in particular students and those folks in the early career stage of their life, because of my own nonlinear path. I've sort of lived this ever-changing world of work myself, and made creative and untraditional decisions, as far as 15, 20 years ago. And that's really helped string me through a lot of different situations and environments, including corporate, government, startups, academia, and obviously now to US News. And I've had the privilege throughout, especially the last 10 years, working at places like MIT, Columbia, now at NYU, and have really had the privilege of coaching and working with thousands of students at this point. And although I don't come in as a career counselor, just because of my background and the many non-traditional paths that students are looking to take today, have ended up, in formal and informal capacities, coaching basically thousands of students at this point that I've taught in my classes and outside. And so I've really been in this work, firsthand for about 10 years at this point. And so let's get into where we are in this moment. So first, this should not be a surprise to anybody, but job seeking and the world of work overall is changing right before our eyes. And so the first thing I think to sort of frame this with, something I say a lot when I'm doing these kinds of talks, is really acknowledging the accelerating pace of change in our world. And you can sort of visualize this by thinking about how the pace of change will never be slower than it is today, right? I'm just going to say that one more time to let it sink in. The pace of change will never be slower than it is today. And when we look at the way that that's affecting job seeking and jobs overall, we see that for younger folks, Gen Z, millennials, the research has shown that they are going to change jobs 4 times more frequently than their parents did. So think every 2.5 years, the research is starting to show versus every 10 years. And so what that really means is something, if job seeking was a painful process, 10, 20, 30 years ago, it was only a painful process for a human, 3, 4, 5 times throughout their career if the average change was every 10 years. Now for the younger generations who are going to be in the workforce for the long haul in the future, we expect them to shift jobs every couple of years, which means that that really is not a band-aid, a problem you can band-aid every 10 years. That's something that you're going to be in much more frequently. And so thinking of job seeking as a skill of the future, as something that people are going to have to become comfortable with and be ready to be adaptable, that's really sort of the lens that I'm looking at this from today. And when we look at sort of that process of what it means and what it looks like right now to apply for a job, and from my viewpoint, it's a very broken process. And I would almost say at this point, pretty irrevocably broken. And I'll show you some research that sort of illustrates why that is. And so this research, the first thing I'll mention is that I usually have a date on the slide, and it doesn't today, but this research is from February 2024. So this is 2 years old. And so my gut would tell me that these numbers are a lot higher today. And so with this slide from a company here in New York called Ripple Match that does a lot of supporting college students and graduate students through their initial job searches, is that they were seeing that their users on average were applying to over 100 jobs, and that 25% of their audience was actually applying to 300 plus jobs at a time. And I would just say anecdotally from the students that I've met over the last couple of years, I've heard numbers much higher, 450 from a grad student who was applying to internships last summer, experienced people who have been in the tech field for 20 years applying to 800 jobs, right? And why is this? Like, why are people sort of doing this? Well, I would say the process is kind of broken, right? When you think about how can a person even apply to 300, 400, 800 jobs? Well, the internet's really enabled that, right? The auto apply button that we see on LinkedIn or Indeed or all these traditional job boards have become very prominent and very normal for people to just apply to a job with the click of a button. So the barrier to apply to a job is so much lower than it used to be. And when you think about the noise that that's created in the ecosystem of job applications and the volume that we saw on that previous slide, well, that's already a noisy environment to be a part of, both from the candidate and the employer side. And now with AI becoming pretty ubiquitous for job seekers to leverage, especially those in early career who are pretty native to these tools. We're seeing that early career job seekers are leveraging AI to generate resumes, cover letters, custom for every role that they're applying for. So, being able to differentiate yourself from a peer at your early career when there's already a pretty big lack of differentiation because you just simply haven't had the benefit of time and experience, it is really hard to stand out in this field, right? And so when you think about why candidates are struggling, why early career, why students, why job seekers are struggling overall, I mean, this is really the environment that they're operating in. And we're telling job seekers right now a really common sort of, commentary that I hear about people's process is, this is a volume game. I've got to apply, apply, apply. If I'm not applying, then I'm out of the game. And so people feel like this is a volume game, and they're really, they are furthering sort of those numbers. They are feeling pressure to have a mass quantity of applications as opposed to stress the quality. And then because there's so much noise in the ecosystem, candidates aren't getting feedback, right? And so it's a really negative self-fulfilling cycle where candidates are applying to jobs, they're not getting any feedback, they're feeling more insecure about the market, and so that's forcing them that they feel like they should continue to apply, apply, apply. And so there's this sort of sick cycle happening where because employers are getting too many applications and they don't have capacity to respond to every one, candidates are lacking feedback, creating insecurity in them, and then creating more and more of this volume game trap. And so when you're kind of depleted from this cycle, when you're applying to 500 jobs and you're only getting 10 callbacks, and maybe the 10 callbacks are for companies that you're not even that excited about because you're, throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks, then candidates are getting burned out, right? They feel like this is hopeless. They're feeling really stressed out. They're feeling overall a lack of motivation. And again, are really stressing this quantity game versus what you'll hear me talk about later, which I think is more important, the quality game. And obviously, this is painful for job seekers, but I will also say I speak to a lot of employers. And for those employers on the line, I know that this is becoming a problem for you too. It's not helping anybody, this kind of volume game and the noise, the level of noise in the job application ecosystem, right? And from an employer's perspective, whether you're from the HR team or the hiring manager, mass applications coming in, the volume going up by 5, 10x that I hear some employers tell me. Obviously, it's creating a lot of overwhelm for their teams to deal with such a quantity of applications. And when they're not able to respond in a timely manner to the applicants that are interested in their jobs, they're obviously weakening the candidate experience, which is really meaningful, especially to those in the early career space. There's a lot of commentary online about that, and Glassdoor asks you about the experience. So overall, this experience that employers have tried so hard to improve over the last number of years is getting harder and harder to sort of execute at a high level. And within all this sort of the noise, obviously it's even really hard to isolate for those candidates that not are only qualified for your role and qualified to succeed in an organization like yours, but it's hard to even tell, right? Are these candidates actually interested in the role and the company, or are they just am I part of the spaghetti that they're throwing at the wall? And so obviously the consequence, if you're in employer branding, recruitment marketing, your job is getting harder and harder as you're kind of losing control of the overall process and experience when you're doing recruiting candidates. And when we turn to our research now, the great thing that we sort of found is that students are picking up on this. So as Michael said, and I'll get into the details in a second, we recently ran last fall a survey of students. I'll show you the breakdown of the students in a second, and ask them a number of different questions about how they're approaching their internship search. So how are they applying for internships? What are they hoping? What are their expectations for their internships? And one of the things we ask them is, where are you even applying these days? And so LinkedIn by far is definitely the highest place. That could be the auto apply button. It could be that they're making connections and working with people on LinkedIn. Obviously, it's a very diverse and multifaceted tool. Social media, personal network, all things that I think are very positive, that they're really sort of feeling this burnout and feeling how ineffective these job boards are. And so what we're really seeing in our research that the job boards of the last 20 years, whether it's Monster.com or Indeed or Handshake, which is really designed for the college set, these are not the top choices for how students are actually searching and applying for their internships right now, which I think is honestly spot on. I think that's a really positive thing to see. And the other thing that we, right away observed in the research that I thought was really indicative of sort of the mood of young people and those at the beginning of their career right now is that because the world is so uncertain, because so much is changing around them, because we're sort of saying, hey, we don't even know what the entry-level job market's going to be now that AI is going to come in and potentially replace, whether it's humans or skills or tasks. I think students feel that pressure, feel that uncertainty. And what they're saying is like, hey, we want in. We want to get in. We want to jump in and get work experience. The question that we asked that you're seeing the results of on the screen right now was, what is really the number one motivation for getting an internship? And they want experience, right? They want to take what they've learned in the classroom and actually, from a practical perspective, understand what this feels like and looks like when they graduate in the professional realm, right? And so not only do they want work experience, which is obviously by far the number one motivation for the majority of our respondents, but they want skills, they want full-time jobs. What I really hear, and I think you'll see from a lot of this research, is they're looking for certainty and they're trying to grab on to anything that feels tangible, certain, to get them from the classroom to the beginning of their career. And the report that we put together, by the way, is on our website now. Everything that I'm going to be citing and talking about, you can access on our website, and we'll be sharing this report with everybody who's on the call now as a thank you for joining us. We'll make that very accessible for you after. But I just want to make sure everybody knows where I'm pulling this from. And who are the people that we even surveyed, just to give you an idea of what the population was. As Michael said, we had over 1,700 respondents, and they really represent a nice swath of a diverse group of students. We have undergrads, grads, high school students even represented, and a meaningful amount of recent graduates as well. And I thought what was interesting is that a lot of our respondents have actually had prior internship experience. So, they've had some success, perhaps they've had some learnings, and they're obviously looking to have more, which is great to see. And the industries that the respondents are interested in, interesting and overwhelmingly, still in the technology space, healthcare space, which was great to see, engineering and construction, finance, media, and so forth. Okay, and so what we see here, I thought was also a really interesting finding, and I think is a little bit counter to the public narrative that we all sort of talk about, in particular with Gen Z, about what they're looking for and what types of environments they want to work in. And I know that the text is a little small on this slide, so I will talk through each of these graphs. But really, what I saw from all these different results that I'm showing you is that people want to be in community with each other. They want to actually be in person. They actually want to work with other humans. They don't want the biggest company in the world, and they don't want the smallest. So the preferences for the size of the intern class that the respondents would want to be a part of, and the size of the companies that they'd want to be interning at, were about medium. So it's not, I want to work at, Amazon, where there's over 1 million employees, and it's not, I want to work at the startup, the hot startup that's just getting started and probably feels a little bit risky to some students. They want something in the middle. So they want a meaningful amount of colleagues. They sort of over-indexed in the 200 to 1,000 employee range for the total company size that they're interested in. And then from an intern perspective, they want to be in a cohort of peers. They want to be with, on average, 6 to 20 other peers. And very few people said, I want to be the only intern. And then again, the work preference. So you'll see 85% of our respondents said that they want to be in the office to some degree, 45% saying hybrid, 40% actually saying I want to be full-time in the office, and a very small percentage want to be remote, closer to 15%. And again, to me, somebody who's worked with students, who sort of knows the environments that young people live in, it's not a surprise. When I lived in New York City, when I was 20 years old in my first internship, I lived in a college dorm over the summer when it wasn't being used, and I wouldn't say there was a lot of space to work from. And so, I'm thrilled to sort of see that young people are hungry to build community, to be with other people, to learn in person. But again, I don't think that should be such a surprise to folks these days. And back to this overall narrative that we were talking about at the onset of this is, students are looking for certainty. So when we ask them, what's the biggest benefit that you're looking for your internship? It's not, remote work. It's not different perks in the office. It's really like, I want that full-time job offer. I want to know that if I'm going to come here, that if I'm going to spend time here, there's the potential that I will be able to have a full-time job offer, and I'll have that certainty of, employment after graduation. Professional development, by far and away the second highest request, followed by networking. And again, I think this is really indicative of students and young people saying, I want to get my foot in the door. I want to actually, move from the campus into office life, into my professional life. And that's really sort of number one. After, when I get there, I'll sort of figure it out. And I'm sure they'll take advantage of any of the benefits that employers provide. But, first things first, they want an offer, and they want to know that they're going to grow in the place that they choose to be. Okay, and then just one more slide about some of the specific learnings from our survey. And so this is really responding to the specific professional development opportunities that students want. They got to pick as many as they want, which is why the percentages are so high. And again, I think very encouraging of the wide variety of a professional development that they're looking for and excited about. Everything from skill building workshops that you can see here, to online courses, certifications, coaching, resume building. And then this one I thought was really interesting. It's on par for the highest percentage with skill building workshop, but they actually want to present to the leadership. And we actually gave some of the students, or all the students who responded, the opportunity to share some commentary with us, some just text that they could type into the survey. And I thought it was encouraging also that a few of the respondents really repeated that they not only wanted to present to leadership, but they wanted the opportunity to do projects with their peers. They wanted to build relationships through the course of their summer, not only with more senior folks and a lot of stakeholders within the organization, but they really wanted to be with each other, right? And peers who were kind of in the same shoe as them. And I think that's great because to me that says, A, they want to be with other people. They don't want to be isolated, which is good. And again, something I think post-COVID, we're all trying to be extra aware about ensuring that people are not isolated. But I think on the other end, to me, that really shows that they understand the values of networking with their peers and they understand the value of beginning to build relationships at this early stage in their career, which when we see the takeaways and the actions that I would recommend that you can encourage students to do to help them stand out in the marketplace today, to me, it's really relationships are a key foundation of that. And so I was encouraged to see that students get that. They're raising their hand and saying, yes, I want to be in person and I want to be with other people, not just more senior than me who can, help get my foot in the door, but with the peers that I'm going to be building my career alongside in this ever-changing world for a long time. Michael,
Carly,
yeah.
yeah, I have a question that I think is this is a good moment for it from someone in the audience. Not to get ahead of you, but the idea, someone asked about networking and the value of and importance of networking, and I think it's from the lens of a prospective or a potential intern or a former intern. It seems like that's very clear in what you just shared from the data, but from your own awareness and expertise and conversations with employers, what can you say about the relationships that you build and that carry you through, especially at this given time when there's so much news reporting about the difficult job market and it being tricky to find a job. So in short, kind of what is the value of networking from, your sense from the employer perspective?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting that you asked specifically from the employer perspective. I'm going to talk a lot in the final sort of block that we're getting into here about the value from the job seeker perspective. And I really think that, fair or not, because the ecosystem is so noisy, both for employers again and job seekers, it's not a good environment for anybody at this point. That relationships at the end of the day really help you navigate through noise, help you stand out in a noisy environment. And so I think, again, fair or unfair, relationships are how you're going to get things done. Relationships are the reason that I've had every single job in my career that I've had. So I'm, the product of this, and that's why I'm such a big believer in it. And I'm going to repeat something that you'll hear me say in a second, but I think, relationships aren't just about getting the job. It's about helping you figure out what you even want to do and where you could do that. And I think the other big thing that I don't hear talked about so publicly, but I think is an important thing to sort of take a moment to step back and realize is that not only is the pace of work changing so much faster, but just work in general has become so more nuanced, right? So we don't have the taxonomy. There's a lot of people trying to work on the taxonomy of like, what is a role? Right? What does a product marketing manager do? What does a brand marketing marketer do? Right? It used to just be marketing. And now that we're in such a multimedia world where you're trying to reach people in all sorts of ways, like these roles have just become so much more multifaceted and so even understanding, especially at the beginning of your career, what are the roles in this area that I think I'm interested in? What do those jobs actually mean? Where could I find those jobs, right? If I'm a marketer, I could work anywhere. I could work in healthcare. I could work for a hospital. I could work for a media company. I could work for a bank. I could work for a startup. And so again, I think relationships, I think people assume that that's how you maybe get the job. But I would sort of argue even more important at first, it's really helping you to ideate on what the job possibilities even are for you.
Great, thank you. And a couple other questions I think relate
Yep,
to what you're about to share. So I'll let you continue and chime in with those in a
perfect.
little bit.
Perfect. Okay. I think we're good on time. But in short, I have a lot of empathy for students. Like I said, I spend a lot of time with them. I know it's tough out there. I know that they've been sort of, right, if you think about an average undergrad right now or an average, 20-something-year-old, they were really our guinea pigs for growing up with digital devices, right? We were all screaming out loud. I worked for the Bloomberg administration here in New York 13 years ago, and we were talking about how learning how to code was going to ensure that people have jobs, for a long, long time. And obviously the AI conversation has really changed the dynamic there. And so I think it's a tough time. And obviously, the unknown consequences of AI. Will there be less jobs? We don't know yet. I think there's just speculation at this point, but I get it. If you're at a university, if you're sitting on campus, sort of just like waiting to get in the game, I think it's a tough time. I think you're sitting on a lot of anxiety. And again, why I'm not surprised to see in the data that, if they're feeling anxious, they're just looking for some certainty when they hop into this job market. And so for those of you who know students, have students in your life, I really did want to leave you with some actions that you can encourage them to take, and specifically how I believe that they can really stand out in this very noisy ecosystem, again, that I've talked a lot about today, that we're all sort of surviving in right now. And so I think the antidote to the auto apply, to throwing spaghetti on the wall, to creating a volume game for yourself, I think the brave thing to do is to sort of say, that makes me feel like I'm doing a lot of actions. Pressing buttons and scrolling all day makes me feel like I'm doing something. But, for the majority of folks that I hear from, it's not really resulting in much, right? It's resulting in frustration. It's resulting in no feedback, and again, just overwhelmingly disempowering folks, right? In the time where you really want to be building confidence as you're going to have these conversations with employers. And so to me, the antidote is to sort of take a breath, think about, okay, like, what do I actually want to do? How do I be more intentional about this process and sort of the internet is kind of encouraging me to be? And so to me, the two steps to that are, first, really doing some deep introspection to understand, who am I? What do I want? What do I not want? Not just from what kind of job do I want, but what kind of environment do I want to work in? What do I want to try out, right? Internships would really be about experimentation and figuring out, what do I want to try and see if I'm good at? Do I like a big company? Do I like a small company? Do I like being on a team? Do I like being a solo contributor? Just all these micro decisions that we actually are making. And I think people are making not so consciously when they're taking on roles right now. And so really taking some time, and I'll give you some prompts for how you actually can do this with students in your life. But really figuring out, like, who am I? What do I want? And then once I know that, then I can actually go and build relationships and have much more intentional and focused conversations about, what I'm looking for. And if you go into a relationship or a networking conversation with a really specific ask for the person that you're networking with, that is going to be so much more effective than if you're just sort of generally saying, I'm interested in business, or I'm interested in finance, or I'm interested in, healthcare. That is a really hard thing as somebody who's been on the other side of a lot of networking conversations, trying to help students in particular. The more general the ask, the harder it is for me to be helpful. Okay. And so again, take a sip. Again, I think these habits that you want to build with young people, or really at anybody in any age of their career and stage of this career, but this is specifically focused on young people right now. If we're all going to be changing jobs a lot more frequently, again, these are habits, these are skills that are worth developing, because they're going to come around a lot more frequently than we used to assume that they would. And so to me, right, again, the world is more uncertain. That is a fact. I think all of us are feeling that from all these different angles. And so figuring out, how do I survive and how do I thrive really in an uncertain world that I don't think is going to necessarily I don't think we should count on it becoming more certain. I think because the pace of change is so rapid, it'll just create probably more and more uncertainty. I really believe, again, the antidote to that is relationships. And so, strong relationships provide so much for us. And other people can really be your navigation system. And I sort of say this because I've coached a lot of job seekers, and what I find is that when people are going through this, they tend to isolate themselves in a moment where they really should be doing the opposite and surrounding themselves with people. Because when we go and approach a job search, we're asking big questions about ourselves, right? And we're putting ourselves out there, we're applying, and inevitably in job searches, I have to imagine, I don't have the data, but I have to imagine, 99.9% of job seekers get rejected during a job search at some point, right? You're not going to get every job you apply for. And that's a really personal thing, right? It's hard to tell somebody that you didn't get the job, or it feels like a failure, or you feel like you were rejected. And so, I see time and time again, regardless of, the age of the job seeker, I've worked with mid-career folks, really successful on paper, down to students. And I think the number one mistake people make are relying on themselves for the whole job search, when the truth is you have all these people in your life who actually want to support you, and access to so many more. So again, just reiterating, if you want to convince somebody of the power of relationships, I'll repeat sort of what I was starting to say in response to Michael's question, which, opportunities. Of course, opportunities come from networking. That's kind of what we assume we're going to get from networking is, we need help getting this job. You know this person. Can you intro me or can you send my resume or whatever? I had one person reach out to me already today about it, right? Well, I'm sure lots of us get that all the time. But I think the bigger picture is more important about what relationships can do, right? They can give you feedback, right? So I said, how do I figure out what I'm good at? What are my strengths? How do I tell a nuanced story about myself that talks about my experience, my interests, my hard skills, my soft skills? It's hard to tell a story about yourself, but if you can go ask people that you've worked with or people that you've done projects with or your professors, hey, can you tell me like what is one strength that you've seen from me or what's, one thing that's really stood out in your mind? Feedback, gathering that about yourself is a lot less painful than, sitting in your room and trying to write out all your strengths and doing that yourself. Guidance, right? Especially at the beginning of your career, and because everything is so ever changing, we need help, right? We need help. We need ideas. We need creativity. I want to do this. I thought it should be at this place. Oh, I talked to somebody and they open up a whole new world for where else I could do that role or other companies that I didn't know about or whatever. And then just overall support, right? Again, I really do think job seeking right now is particularly painful. The job market, the labor market is particularly, challenging in this moment. And so it can be an isolating experience and a really, I think, hard experience if you sort of go at it alone. And the good part is everybody's in the same boat right now. Everybody knows the world is more certain, whether you've been in the same industry for 25 years or you're entering it. I think everybody is in a moment of change, which hopefully should unite us all in the same mission as opposed to pit us against each other. Um, and so some of the prompts, if you do work with students or, even you might find this helpful for yourself, again, more than a resume these days is needed to articulate a story about yourself, right? Not just talking about your hard skills, not just talking about your past experiences, but really telling a nuanced story about yourself, about how am I going to continue to evolve if everything is changing around me in a job? How am I going to, how do I learn? Everybody's going to have to be learning a lot more frequently and upskilling and reskilling. What kind of environment should I thrive in, or what kind of environment should I stay away from, right? So these are prompts you can give, right? What hard skills have I acquired? What durable or soft skills do I have? How do I prove that I have those? It's harder to prove that you're a great critical thinker than it is to prove that you're a great software engineer. What type of work environment would I be successful in? Should I be in a large company, a small company? Should I be remote? Should I be in person? Should I be in a casual work environment? Do I want to, get dressed in a suit all day, every day and be in a much more professional or, laced up environment? What do I not want to do in my role? I think as job seekers, a lot of us feel like we don't have any leverage, but that's not true, right? And making sure that you're pretty intentional about, things you're not willing to do or values that you don't align with you is a very important thing to know going into your search. What do I want to be doing in this role? What do I want to try? Again, I think early careers, a lot of the opportunities that they're going for should be thought about as trying as opposed to what is my career going to be? I don't think that's a helpful question anymore at all, assuming you're going to do the same thing for the rest of your career. So it's about trying and iterating. What are my values? And, is the company and leadership that I'm about to join going to align to that? Am I going to have an easy time being here, or is it going to be hard for me to be here? And for me, just again, because I'm a big believer in relationships, I would sort of ask, what type of roles are going to allow me to continue to build relationships in my role? Because a network is not a static thing. It should be, it should be an ongoing attempt and a living, breathing organism. And typically when I'm working with students, if I use the word networking, they give me like a pretty nasty look and they're not excited about that. And I don't love that word either. That's why I talked about relationships so much. Because I think for people, networking means I got to go and I got to talk to people. I got to go to that career fair. I got to go to this dinner party. I have to go and, shake a lot of hands. And that can be pretty uncomfortable for a lot of us. And the great part is that we actually all know a lot of people, right? We're already part of existing communities in our lives. We already have these relationships. We just have to be able to identify them and learn how to leverage them. And so when I'm talking about, and I'll give you a prompt for this next, when we think about what communities we're already a part of, we can think in these little community buckets is a good way to start. getting your mind and your brain working. So, and LinkedIn can be a great tool for this because hopefully you have a bunch of connections and you can start sort of going through those and maybe even putting them in these buckets and helping you get new ideas from there. But if you have a student who's in school, they're part of a community there. They might be, because they're there and they're fresh, maybe it's not just I went to this college, but I went to this college and I'm part of this major and I'm part of these groups and I'm part of this, maybe I have a work program I'm a part of. All of those are micro communities in their lives right now. Maybe they see a bunch of people regularly because of their hobbies. Maybe they're part of a book club, or they go to the same yoga class every week, or they're part of a running club. Maybe they attend church or synagogue or some sort of community organization. Maybe, if you're a parent, you are active in your PTA. You have your kids, your kids' friends' parents who now is a new community. I'm a newer mom, and I've made all these friends because of my kids, and that's a new community for me. Obviously, work, so past internships, volunteer roles, mentors in your life. All of those are great communities and existing relationships that we typically have in our lives, even as young as high school. And then obviously family and friends. You have extended family, you have immediate family, maybe you have friends from different parts of your life already. I think in college, checking out your friends' parents is really helpful. I don't think there's any shame in that. And then so you can sort of understand this exercise and sort of go from here. And so, if you want to prompt a student to start thinking about, hey, it's not about just you should definitely be going to meet new people and adding to this list, but to make people feel like they already have probably what they need. Help them think through like who is my community map? Who do I already know? What are the relationships already in my life? And getting them to sort of think in these community buckets, maybe asking them to create 6, asking them to think about people from their past, even if they haven't connected with the person in a year or 5 years or whatever, it's worth putting the name down. People come in and out of your life all the time. And once you start to write a couple names in each of those buckets, it really does get your brain flowing. And again, this should not be a one-time sort of activity, but hopefully a living, breathing document that you can continue to add to at any point. And I've worked through this exercise with a lot of different job seekers in the past and a lot of students in particular. And it's great to do this exercise actually with a bunch of students at the same time because they're going to crowdsource ideas. They're going to say, I'm a part of this youth group, and somebody else is going to say, I didn't even think about that. I'm part of that. Or, oh yeah, I'm part of this soccer league. You're part of this tennis league, whatever. And so the cool thing is that I've seen after watching people do this, and even when I do it myself, because I try to I try to eat my own dog food. I think one thing that always happens is people are surprised. Oh yeah, I know so many people. I forgot, right? I feel so much more supported and I kind of calm down immediately once I just even have a visual of all the people that I could leverage, that I could ask for help. And I'm already starting to see they work here and they live here. And oh, that it starts to sort of spark these new ideas. You'll probably remember people that you forgot about, maybe have some like happy memories come to your head. And that can be a really joyful activity. I think this should be hopefully, you should get more smiles than frowns when you ask students to do this kind of activity. And then of course you can sort of, especially for students, I think it's great to sort of say, are there new communities that you aspire to be part of and help them sort of maybe from your own experience in your own life, identify things that they could aim to be a part of, whether they're going to be an alumni soon and you help them recognize, wow, you're going to be part of this alumni community and there's going to be alumni events and, A, B, or C, or they have new hobbies that you can point them to, or they're interested in an industry and you can say, hey, there's this, they're interested in real estate in New York. There's the Real Estate Board of New York and they have events, or ABNY. So I think hopefully students are leveraging again the people who are more senior in their life and more experienced and getting new ideas of other places they should be looking and building relationships, not with urgency, but just as naturally as possible in the future. And so I'll just sort of leave you with these thoughts. Hopefully when students are job seeking, they can realize that they're not under leveraged here. They already have so much, right? They already know a lot of people. They're likely doing relationship building and they don't even realize it. So encourage them to lean into what they're already doing and just be a lot more intentional with it and help them recognize the activities that they're doing that are helpful to them and maybe some things like we talked about that maybe are subtracting from their life and aren't so helpful right now. I think it's really important to realize that these relationships are long. I think it's hard to have the perspective when you're really young in your life that people might be around for 10 or 20 or 30 or more years. I think that's hard to sort of imagine when you've only been around for 20 or 25 years. And so just little sort of compounding actions, whether it's teaching them, hey, it's great when the holidays come around, reach out to the professors, after you graduated, or your friends are going to be moving all around the country when you graduate. Why don't you figure out, a trip to take every year or WhatsApp groups that you can all be a part of? And so, for me, once you've sort of identified those communities, if I had more time, I would take you through more steps, but learning how to nurture relationships and then learning how to ask for help from those relationships. To me, those are sort of the key pieces in bringing this all together and really teaching young people or anybody for that sake, how to leverage the relationships that they have in their life to move themselves forward. Um, and Michael, I'll stop there. I think we've got plenty of time if we have any more questions. But hopefully that was a helpful start. And like I said before, we're really excited to share the full research report with everybody on this call today.
Absolutely, Carly. More enormously helpful, and yeah, you shared a lot of insights from the data and takeaways for kind of the different audiences with us today, and who hopefully will find this video from this session in the future. Yeah, let me try to rapid fire a handful of questions because we've got some good ones on a mix of different topics. First, I'll say. What has changed in terms of some of these survey results compared to any past data or any past insights you might have in terms of internships or just more generally? Is that something you could
Yeah, we don't
illuminate?
we don't have data because this is really the first time we've done this. So I don't have data to compare, but I can just say anecdotally, I was a full-time, I was an entrepreneur in residence at MIT for 5 years. COVID was right in the middle of that experience. And so to me, I worked with students across the whole university, whether it was undergrads, graduate students, executives who were coming for executive education or their executive MBAs, PhDs, postdocs, even faculty sometimes. And uh, and I think that there was just an overarching feeling of, figuring out what you want to do with your life is hard, but it's manageable. And we sort of, we're gonna get a job. And I think, the spring of 2000, I was on campus and I quickly sort of put together some peer groups to help those folks who, had sort of their imagined dream job just disappear out of thin air that spring and help them sort of reimagine and not get discouraged. And I will actually say that, 5 years later, I've heard from some of those students that were in that tough place and, the things that they're doing now and those challenges that they faced. And by the way, they had to do the hard work of figuring out how to get a job because they weren't in these traditional paths that, a career services at a top university like that sort of helps. They had friends going to Amazon and JP Morgan, but if they didn't want to do that, it was really hard to find a job that in that moment. Um, and we weren't sure if that would be temporary, and it kind of felt temporary. But I think now, in the last year, I sort of remember saying, I don't think it'll ever be as hard to be a job seeker as it is in COVID. And wow, I can't believe just how I'm having the same conversation with students that doesn't feel like there's an end date to give them or a vaccination that'll, make everything go back. So I think I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but I think COVID was kind of the first time we really started to see probably some of this uncertainty really enter just like the every person. It wasn't a thing isolated to a particular group of people. We all had that uncertainty. And so at least to me, we have a little bit of experience as a collective with that moment of uncertainty. But I think the last 12 months, especially with the introduction of AI, I think 2025 is really a game changer in the labor market. And although again, I think it's all speculation about how it's going to be impacted, but I think the anxiety really started to ramp up in 2025 and definitely continuing still in the first month of this year.
Yeah. Another question, someone asks, do you see any differences based on industry, based on like, what interns or aspiring interns prioritize? The questioner says, for instance, are engineers more focused on competitive pay compared to, the social sciences? Does the data get that granular?
Um, the data does not get that granular. I think anecdotally, uh, again, I think at the end of the day, the data does show that pay is important, but security and knowing that I'm going to just have something when I leave campus is absolutely the priority, regardless of the field that they're looking to join. I think the interesting thing, maybe that's a proxy for compensation, is that I think everybody is eager to widen the aperture of what, their dream company is. I think there's been a lot of disruption, especially if we're talking about like a top tier university or something, assuming that Amazon or Meta or Goldman Sachs, where I started my career, are like the only places to be. I think that is something that a lot of when I talk to career counselors, um, and just overall people who are advising students, I think everybody's trying to get students to really widen the idea of what could be a dream place. And I think students are becoming a lot more open to a really diverse group of opportunities, which I think is important. I don't think there's any perfect job anymore, and I actually think that's a good thing. And that's where those relationships come in. I think helping students get new dream lists, helping them meet mid-size employers, helping them, like there's always going to be some companies like Apple. Everybody uses Apple products, right? That's always going to be something on a student's mind because they just have experience with that brand. But getting them to think through, like, okay, there's Apple, but there's Samsung and there's Intel and there's, all these other sort of names and then these mid-tier companies. I think that's what's happening a lot in counseling in particular in career centers is really trying to widen the aperture, which by the way, if you're a career center, makes your job a lot harder because you have to have so many more relationships for your students with employers than you might have had to a few years ago. Now that even like the number of hires for some of those big companies, we're starting to see them pull back just a little bit.
Yeah, I guess it's semi-related question, but thinking about some of those aspects of an internship or a career that are most valued according to the survey respondents. Again, maybe putting yourself in the employer's shoes and based on your knowledge of the industry and many industries, what are some of the most in-demand skills that employers are saying that they want? Is there a matching of kind of what interns say they want out of an experience and what employers say they want out of an intern? Or how does that look? How does that landscape look if you kind of zoom out?
That's a great question. We're trying to run a pilot right now here at US News all about helping employers better measure the durable skill set, especially of students. And so, although I don't have great data to sort of back this up yet from the employer perspective, I think what they are definitely realizing that they need to put a lens on is a lot more of the durable skills as opposed to the hard skills, which means they have to figure out how to hire for that. And I don't think that they know how. And I think this, auto apply world, again, that's not really an opportunity to showcase your durable skills when you're one of, 5,000 applications where maybe there were 500 a couple of years ago going to the same position. And so I think if I'm a job seeker, if I'm really trying to stand out to an employer, it's really figuring out how to tell a very nuanced story about myself that is not just about what I studied in school and the jobs that I've had. It's really figuring out how do I represent my whole self. And in particular, I mean, if there's one thing I think that all employers are talking about right now, it's how do I know that I have somebody who's going to be able to adapt with the job? We know the job is going to be adapting. We know that people are going to continue to have to learn. And so I used to teach a class at MIT with the ex-chief innovation officer of GE, and she talked about there's EQ, there's IQ, and now there's AQ, like the adaptability quotient. So I think I've started to see some research and some sort of papers out there talking about that. But I think that's a really nice sort of just quick way to, AQ to sort of put that idea in your head.
Definitely. Um, I know a little bit of the answer to this question, but just again, on behalf of our audience, what are some of the resources that US News has for, aspiring interns, for people in the world of work who are interested in kind of learning more, navigating going from a first job to a next job, that sort of thing. I know, for instance, we measured best companies to work for internships, but could you
Yep.
talk about a couple of the other resources? And again, I would encourage you in our audience to visit careers.usnews.com to really kind of unspool everything we have there.
Yeah, so like Michael said, we do an ever expanding product and list every year called Best Companies to Work For. And so we name those in specific industries, specific geographies, but we also for the first time last year started a list specifically for internships. And the great thing about that list is that it's not like a traditional stacked ranked list. We're not saying, X is the number one company for everybody. I think my biggest belief as somebody who coaches job seekers is how, again, I want job seekers to be thoughtful about what's best for them and start being intentional. And so we actually rate every company that we look at in 6 different categories. and score and, at a 1 to 5, for instance, in work-life balance or belongingness or professional development. So again, if a job seeker is coming to our site to look at that list, hopefully what they're actually going to do is go in, do a search based on their own personal parameters, and then dig into all the job profiles that we have for all the companies, or company profiles rather, and learn a lot more about that employer, as opposed to, again, just sort of saying, oh, US News said this is the #1 best company to work for. This must be the best for me, because I don't think that is true. I think everybody has different needs in their life depending on where they are and what they're looking for. And then the last thing I'll sort of plug is that, like I mentioned, we're going to be launching a durable skills assessment that's really aimed at students who are looking for internships. So for folks who are in university settings or work with a lot of students or have students in your life, hopefully that'll be something that we'll be launching at the beginning of the next quarter to look out for.
Great. Got time for probably a couple more questions. And actually, here's one that's a comment that I think is worth raising, and love your reaction to or expansion on. The listener just says that I like the concept of community buckets, because it's something that can also help a student develop a sense of belonging in an area where they may lack confidence. And kind of I wonder what your thought on that is, Carly, and thinking back especially to what you talked about doing that self-reflection and realizing in some senses your network is bigger than you may think it is, or
Yeah.
some of these communities that you don't think of as opportunities to find a different path career-wise are right there.
Yeah, I mean, I hope what the exercise does immediately is 3 things. One, I hope it calms somebody down and does make them feel that they're more supported than they might have assumed that they were. The second thing is that I hope it helps them generate some new ideas just by, if, for instance, if you're in college and you have friends outside of your program, my best friend from college is still my best friend now. She's in film. I have no idea what, I know everything about that industry from her, and I get to learn from her every day, but it opens my eyes to other things because I have these relationships in my life other than the things I assume I'm interested in or have spent time in. So creativity and new ideas is definitely #2. And then I think 3 is kind of like inspiration. I think if you sort of see that you already have, it might make you, it might take away some of that friction of saying like, okay, I already have, 50 relationships. I can go get 2 more. That doesn't sound so scary, as opposed to feeling like I have 0 and I got to go get 50.
Yeah. Another comment, but again, I think one I'd love your reaction to. Someone in the audience writes, while students may be viewing internships as an opportunity to explore career paths, employers often look to maximize the ROI on their internship programs by using these as a path to full-time roles.
Yep.
Students should be honest in terms of what they're looking for, and also understand the motivation and the perspective of the employer. Is that something you would double down on, or have any
Um,
additional answer on?
I wouldn't double down on that. I'd say, yeah, that is what an employer wants, and that's great. And they should stay committed to that, and they should figure out how to best suss that out if that's really what they're after. But I think, again, because people are going to be switching jobs more frequently, that is just what the research, that's research from the BLS. That's not research from us, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. I think it's okay to sort of say, I did not like this, or it did not work for me, or I don't, and that's okay to switch. And, learning how to leave gracefully and not burn a bridge is another really important life skill that I think if you're young in your career is something really to work on actively, because definitely took me 15 years to even get comfortable having one of those hard conversations. And so I would say, yeah, employers, sure, like absolutely, that from an ROI perspective, it totally makes sense. But I think this is where I think the job seekers need to feel like they have more ownership over their career and their trajectory, and that switching, although you shouldn't switch every 6 months or every year, you should stick to, there's benefit in staying in a job for a while and becoming more, experienced and senior there. I don't think you have to stay forever if it's not working for you. And I think you're just, early in your career, you should be gathering information, and that would just be information to inform the next thing you want to do.
Great. Well, let's ask a final question, and also it'll be sort of a two-parter. Do you have any final takeaways for students, for sort of the intern cohort, and then also for employers? I wonder if you could kind of, again, either echo something you mentioned before, or slip in something that you haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, I think for employers, I'll start with, I think the research should actually make them more confident that, again, Gen Z is not looking, despite what I just sort of mentioned, if it's not working, you should leave. I do think that, but I don't think they're looking to just leave. I don't think they're looking to switch for the sake of switching. I think they're looking to have transparency to understand sort of like what they're getting themselves into. And so I think for employers, it's hard to create certainty right now. I'm not saying that that's kind of like a practical thing to ask employers to do, but I do think being transparent, having really clear communication, not just with senior management, not just with managers, but all the way down is really important. And if I've worked in startup environments, if there's never certainty in those, but I think the more transparent and the more honest you can be with your workforce about what's happening, the more that they can trust you and that they're going to know if there's something, coming up or that you'll help them if something happens that is sort of out of everybody's control. So that's sort of what my message would be to employers. Can't ask you to do complete miracles and create certainty, but can encourage you to be as transparent as possible. And then for job seekers on the same, I think again, if you can be very intentional about what you want and what you're looking for, then I think you're going to make a much better decision. I think I don't think it's actually going to take the job search any longer than it would if you're auto applying. It might feel like you're moving a little slower, but that's okay, right? And the great part about doing a really intentional job search via relationships is that the relationships you're making that might not result in your job this time totally might be the way you get your next job or the job after that or the job after that. So again, thinking about this as a real lifelong endeavor as opposed to just, I think that's where the misses on campuses are right now, really gearing this all towards the first job and making that such a big decision as opposed to sort of saying, this is a big career, this is just your first decision. That's the framing I would really encourage those who are working with students to help them think more like that.
Well, I think we'll have to leave it there, but I think that's a great place to leave it. I really want to thank you, Carly, for sharing so much
Thank you.
insight about our survey and the internship and kind of career landscape. To those of you in our audience who joined us and who asked great questions, thanks also to you for making the time. Just a reminder, please do visit careers.usnews.com for more information on finding an internship, navigating the path to that first or that next job, and for our latest rankings of best jobs, which were released earlier this month. Do stay tuned for a follow-up message from our team about some of the information and the report that we discussed today.